Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. Thank you for tuning in to your Alaska weather. Tonight is May 16th, 2018. Happy Wednesday to you all. As always, if you need to get in touch with us, 1-800-472-0391. That'll connect you to the entire state, and you can punch the prompts for the office that you'd like to talk with and speak with a forecaster, Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage. And weather.gov/Alaska is going to give you a statewide perspective as well, and from there you can use the point-and-click feature to dial into your local area. And then if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, our email, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, and somebody will be sure to get back with you as soon as possible. So let's take a look at our weather across the state today, and our only hazard that we want to talk about is a frost advisory out for much of the area, Gustavus, up into Juneau, and Hoona, and those areas from 2 a.m. tonight until 8 a.m. On Thursday morning. And again, that's a frost advisory, expecting some pretty cold overnight temperatures there with the clear skies and the dry conditions, so allowing those temperatures to fall all the way down. Hoona hit 28 degrees last night, so pretty chilly, expecting a pretty close repeat of that same thing tonight, and we'll get into that a little bit more here with our temperatures in just a few minutes. How about our breakup for this afternoon? Well, not a lot of change. The warmer conditions have started to allow things to open up a little bit more for the Yukon, the lower Yukon, but still seeing things pretty calm for the most part, relatively calm. The Kuskokwim, of course, is open now, and we're just watching the ice primarily through the Yukon and a little bit there south of Galena. So keeping an eye on things for you in the RFC, the River Forecast Center, with Alaska's River Watch 2018. As we go into fire danger now, not a whole lot to speak of other than just this small area here in the interior, and that's just because of the drying conditions and the warmer temperatures that are starting to finally build into those locations. I do want to mention that down for southeast Alaska, where there's a special weather statement out for the Haines up through the White Pass area, and this is just for increased fire risk for Thursday, and that's because of the hot and dry conditions, or warmer and dry conditions, 70 to 75 degrees, dry conditions in there. So with some winds from the sea breezes and whatnot, a little bit of increased fire danger, especially in the grasses in those areas. So be sure to check out that special weather statement again from the Juneau Forecast Office. All right, now let's take a look at our satellite. And as you can see here, a nice quiet day across southeast Alaska, clear skies, just the reflection of the snow on the satellite image there. Really the main story continues to be this moisture feed that is running up into south central and southwest Alaska, and that will continue to be the key for the next several days as this warmer air and moisture starts to push up against here, keeping showers and rain going for much of Kodiak Island up through the Kenai Peninsula and then off into the Alaska Range as well. That's also helping to trigger some thunderstorms over the interior, and you can see those there. Haven't quite developed all the way into thunderstorms as of this afternoon, but are expecting those to develop later on and into the evening. As you look towards the Arctic coastline there, let's loop it again. You can see a pretty quiet flow, not a lot of strong systems or strong turbulent flow up there. So therefore, we have some fog and some low stratus, keeping things very difficult for aviation. Same story there near the Kotzebue Sound. And then let's switch over here and look at our IR feed, and you can see here out towards the Bering Sea, high pressure remaining in control, keeping things pretty quiet out there as well, with some low stratus plaguing the areas down through the Pribilof Islands. And then our next weak system off to the west, it is a warm front, but it is slowly stalling out as it runs into this ridge of high pressure. So two primary areas of high pressure, one right here over southeast Alaska and the other over here in the Bering Sea. And you can see that reflected there at 1,028 millibars for our high pressure here over southeast Alaska. And so that's keeping things very quiet and nice dry conditions for much of you folks in the Juneau area. All across southeast Alaska, dry offshore flow with just some sea breezes in the afternoons. For this afternoon, for much of south central and southwest Alaska, while wet weather and showers have returned, Kodiak Island raining this afternoon. Those rain showers are spreading up through the Kenai Peninsula as we speak and starting to make their way towards the Susitna Valley and the Copper River Basin. Starting to mix once you get into higher elevations, not too high off the deck, about 2,500 feet. That's where we're starting to see some snow mix in. So still fairly cold and low freezing levels, low snow levels for this time of year, May 16th. Don't generally see this. Low pressure, mainly because of some thermal troughing. Some of those warmer temperatures are starting to creep in, so it kind of induces a low pressure. It's not a strong low at 1,022 millibars. However, that is what helps to create the convection, the afternoon showers, the afternoon thunderstorms. And so that's what we're seeing this afternoon up there. Again, that fog hanging in there along the Kotzebue Sound, and that doesn't look to be going anywhere, all completely gone anytime soon. but it is starting to lift just a little bit from the dense conditions that we saw yesterday. And then stratus along the Arctic coastline. Some showers continue across the Bering Sea, but really it's just the stratus that we're kind of keeping an eye on out there. And then, of course, our next front well off to the west. And that really doesn't make much progress tonight. It kind of stalls out over towards Shimya and really struggles to impede upon this area of high pressure. So with that area of high pressure, expect more stratus, more fog to persist for the overnight period. As we look up towards the Arctic coastline, that's where we see just some showers left over from our afternoon thermal trough, and this is the representation of that trough. So just some showers left over. There could be rain showers mixing with snow at times, certainly for higher elevations. Again, with this cold air mass in place, you can't really rule that out at any time. And then our wet weather really is the main story across the state for much of south central and southwest Alaska. Even if you are in the downsloping region on the north side of the terrain, it still is going to be showery at times and plenty of cloud cover, cool temperatures, so keeping things rather unseasonable for May. As we look over towards southeast Alaska, well, our high is at 1,027 millibars and holding strong into Thursday, so therefore those increased fire conditions, fire concerns across much of the northern portions of the Panhandle. Thermal trough well inland over into Canada for those folks, but that should not have much impact at all on your weather for southeast Alaska on Thursday. And as you can expect there, more of the same story for south central and southwest Alaska with wet weather continuing to push in. This warm front will help conditions to slowly warm a little bit, but it's still going to be relatively wet, especially on the Gulf Coast and the southeast facing side. As we look up towards the Arctic coastline, just a weak area of snow moving along the Brooks Range, and then some more scattered showers on Thursday, especially the further east you go, better chance with a little bit better instability. Meanwhile, high pressure continues to dominate on Thursday out over the Bering. Friday, things start to get a little bit quieter over the Arctic coastline, probably see some more stratus and some fog possibly develop up there as high pressure drifts to the south. And really the story is going to be the wet weather continuing for much of the Kenai Peninsula, off into southwest Alaska, even the Cook Inlet areas. However, again, we will see with the southerly flow, we will see temperatures starting to warm. Maybe a slight increase in clouds for you over southeast on Friday, but really no hazardous weather to be concerned about. And then showers continuing to pivot around this area of low pressure on into Friday to end the week. As we look towards low temperatures tonight, again, our primary concern is going to be with some frost conditions in the Gustavus, Haines, Juneau, and Hoonah area tonight. Otherwise, across the rest of the state, you're generally seeing those cloud conditions keeping things a little bit warmer, upper 30s for the most part across southern Alaska with some low 40s even, and then along the Brooks Range and northward, you're seeing conditions in the teens. On into Thursday afternoon, rebounding quickly for southeast and the interior with temperatures climbing up towards 70 degrees, meanwhile hanging around 50 for southern Alaska. And for Friday morning, temperatures will be a little bit warmer than they have been in the low 40s, generally in the mid 30s to low 40s across southern Alaska, and then near teens along the Brooks Range. And finally, Friday afternoon, seeing things a little bit warmer throughout much of the state. Stay tuned.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, let's take a look up in your atmosphere at the flying weather now for your aviation forecast Thursday morning. You can see here, not going to expect a whole lot of change in this trend. This southerly flow continues to push a ton of moisture up against the Kodiak Island area and all the way in through the Alaska Peninsula, up through the south side of the Kenai Peninsula, and even into parts of Prince William Sound. You'll notice the trend here is that the areas in the southeasterly facing slopes are the ones that have the most widespread IFR conditions, and that's because that moisture rides up that terrain and helps to create that upslope condition and lower the ceilings, potentially create more showers, lower visibility, henceforth the IFR conditions. MVFR surrounding that, except there in the Cook Inlet area where we have some downsloping coming out over the Chugach Mountains and helping to create a little bit of drier conditions. Once we get up towards the Brooks Range and northern portion of the state, you can see MVFR with IFR pockets up there, and then IFR all along the north coast there. In the Kotzebue Sound, we still have some IFR conditions because of the fog expected on Thursday morning. MVFR will be widespread once again across the Bering. So as this system starts to kind of turn from east to west a little bit more, those IFR conditions start to slide a little bit further to the south, but still favoring those south and east facing slopes, and then MVFR conditions up through the Susitna Valley, down through Bristol Bay, and over into the Kuskokwim Delta area. As we look up towards the Arctic coastline there, still MVFR conditions into the afternoon on Thursday, but pockets of IFR are starting to become a little bit less widespread. Out towards the Bering, MVFR conditions do persist for the most part, and that doesn't really change a whole lot into Friday morning out over the Bering. The next front is just kind of hung up there out over the western Aleutians. And then as we look towards south central and southwest Alaska, you can see those IFR conditions continue to slide a little bit from east towards the west, starting now to clip into the Pribilof Islands area, and then MVFR conditions still fairly widespread across western Alaska. Up towards the Arctic coastline, not a lot of change from Thursday into Friday, with still pretty widespread IFR and definitely widespread MVFR conditions. Finally, some improvement though by Friday afternoon as we get a little bit more flow up there, helping to mix some of the air out, and so that will help to bring some drier air in and start to improve the ceilings and the visibility. IFR conditions will not improve across southern portions of Kodiak Island into the Alaska Peninsula, where that front is basically stalling out across that area, with MVFR conditions stretching all the way from the Gulf back through western Alaska and into the Bering. Notice I haven't said much about southeast for this aviation forecast. It's because it's going to be VFR throughout. Good conditions there for flying through the next several days. So how about for our passes? Well, IFR to MVFR conditions for Anaktuvik. Pretty low conditions up there. Same story for Adigan. IFR conditions through the day. Lake Clark and Merrill, you will see instrument flight rules through the day. And rainy, maybe just on the fringe of starting to improve through the day, IFR to MVFR conditions. Windy, you should be a little bit further enough to the east to see MVFR conditions through the day. Isabel, you're going to be also right on that fringe of the MVFR conditions. And then by the time we get far enough east to Mentasta, we should see the VFR conditions. Tanita will be improving through the day from marginal visual flight rules to visual flight rules. Portage, however, will not be improving, staying at IFR through the day. And once again, Chilkoot and White Pass is looking gorgeous for tomorrow. How about for those freezing levels? Well, start to see those warmer temperatures creeping up as that North American ridge builds over southeast Alaska. Temperatures all the way, or freezing levels all the way up to 10,000 feet here. And then looking back towards western Alaska, that's where that cold trough is still parked, but it's starting to be pushed a little bit from east to west. So we're starting to see freezing levels climb just a little bit, 4,000 feet there over much of south central, and then down to about 2,000 feet here over the YK Delta, and then down to the surface once you're up near the Brooks Range. And so in icing, reflects like this, with all that moisture coming up, considerable moderate above 9,000 feet, stretching from Kodiak Island down through the eastern Aleutians, and then another small area of above 6,000 feet, considerable moderate, basically where that upslope flow is heading the Alaska Range. And then that'll all be surrounded by isolated moderate across much of south central and southwest Alaska, with some isolated moderate above 6,000 along the Brooks Range. Above 9,000 there out along the warm front over the western Aleutians. Jet stream, pretty amplified pattern with this diving trough here out over the eastern Bering, 70 knots coming in, and then moving out over the state at about 95 knots. Start to see that ridge making its way up here with about 80 knots coming over top of that. The real strong jet is still down south in the North Pacific. How does that look at 9,000 feet? Well, we see that southeasterly flow becoming more east and then northeast out over the southern portion of the state. Fairly light conditions for the most part of the state, with westerly winds along the Arctic coastline and just high pressure with northerly winds for southeast Alaska. And then down at 3,000 feet, not expecting a lot of change, just a little bit lower wind speeds, but directions should be much the same. So that leaves our turbulence from southeast winds below 4,000 feet for much of the gaps along the chain and out over the western Aleutians.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen, and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. And the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Now let's take a look at your marine forecast, starting with the sea ice edge. And as you can see, analyzed once again by Mr. Chris today, we continue to see things mushing out and melting across much of northwestern Alaska down to the Chukchi Sea and all the way down to the Bering Strait. Just a little bit of marginal ice holding on down here in the Norton Sound, but the shore-fast ice is pretty much all gone at this point. Still some shore-fast ice basically east of Point Barrow, but once you get to the west, there's very little holding on over towards Wainwright and Point Lay. That northeast flow continues to kind of work on this ice pack and open up leads, and once those are open and once the ice is broken away from the main ice pack, then it just basically melts in place because of the warm sea surface temperatures and the sunlight this time of year. So let's move on now into southeast Alaska's marine forecast for Thursday. Up towards Lynn Canal, southeast winds 10 knots and seas 2 feet. Down towards the Clarence Strait and to Stevens Passage, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots and seas 2 to 3 feet. Over towards the open waters, west wind becoming a northwest and then a northerly wind 10 to 20 knots and seas between about 5 and 6 feet. On Friday, still pretty quiet conditions, mostly going to be dominated by sea breezes, but we do see north winds in Lynn Canal 10 knots, seas 2 feet, and then south winds in Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait 2 to 3 foot seas, 10 to 15 knots on those winds. And then over the open waters, south winds on the southern part of the open waters, 10 to 15 knots, 6 to 8 foot seas. But once you get up towards Yakutat, you go northerly, 20 knots and seas about 8 feet. And then northwest for the northern Gulf there, seas about 8 feet, 15 knots on the wind speeds. For much of south central Alaska, I'll slide over so you can see the whole picture here. And as you can see, northwest winds for Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound in the protected areas, 15 to 20 knots and seas between 3 and 6 feet there. And then a little bit more variable flow over the eastern portion of the Gulf, 10 knots out of the west and seas 6 feet, but then generally a west to northwest flow for the rest of the area, 15 to 30 knots and seas between 7 and 11 feet. On Friday, you can see north and northwest winds in the protected areas, Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet, 10 knots and seas about 2 feet. And then out towards the southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds becoming easterly south of Ketchimak Bay there, 15 knots, seas 3 to 4 feet. Out over the open waters, 10 to 15 knots anywhere across the northern Gulf, and basically a northwest becoming an easterly direction here north of Kodiak Island, 10 to 15 knots, seas about 8 feet. As we slide towards the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, you can see a southeast flow coming around that warm front and then switching to a northeast on the north side of the chain there. Generally 20 knots across the area, and seas going to be between 4 and 6 feet north of the peninsula and 6 to 9 feet south of the chain. And then on Friday, you can see a northwest and a northeast and a southeast wind, about 20 to 25 knots across this area, 8 to 10 foot seas, and then north side of the Alaska Peninsula, east winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. How about for the Aleutian chain? Well, on Thursday, north wind across the eastern Aleutian becoming northeast and then eventually easterly, increasing as you get towards that next front to about 30 knots, but otherwise 15 to 20 knots. Seas also building from 5 to 7 feet all the way up to 9 to 13 feet towards the western Aleutians. On Friday on the Aleutian chain, you can see an east wind becoming a north wind over the eastern Aleutians, about 20 knots, seas running between 6 and 8 feet there. And then similar story for the central Aleutians out of the east, 20 to 25 knots. And then by the time you get out towards that front that is decaying, 30 to 35 knots all the way up to gale force, seas building 9 to 15 feet. For the western capes, you can see a northeast wind across this area becoming northerly by the Pribilof Islands, 10 to 20 knots, and seas about 5 to 6 feet. And then on west coast on Friday, northeast to an east wind down towards the Kuskokwim Bay, and those are going to be between 15 and 25 knots, seas generally between 3 and 7 feet. For the Arctic coastline, looking for an east to northeast wind across the northern portion of the state, 10 knots and all ice covered up there. And then once you get to the western portion, northwest portion, and the Chukchi Sea, expect more of a variable wind southeast to easterly, 5 to 10 knots, and seas pretty quiet at 1 to 2 feet. Similar story for those areas on Friday with an easterly wind in the ice-covered areas at about 10 knots and then becoming east and northeast, 15 to 25 knots, building up a little bit there, seas 3 to 5 feet. So let's recap our forecast. Really the big picture is high pressure over the southeastern portion of the state, high pressure over the Bering, and in between just a lot of south and southeasterly moisture starting to finally bring up some warm air with this warm front. And so that is going to help the temperatures to modify, but with the cloud cover and the precipitation, don't expect a real spring-like pattern to set up. Still some showers over the interior while things remain quiet on Thursday over southeast, and then we'll see conditions start to cloud up just a little bit on Friday over southeast while they remain wet and starting to warm over south central. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.